Hi there friends, and welcome to my game review of Legend of Keepers. I'm Icon, and in this video I will talk about the game's core mechanics. I will also introduce a typical day in the life of a dungeon keeper to you. I will introduce the good sides and the bad sides about the game and give you a little bit of a summary of what it's all about in between. So let's get right started. In its core, the game is pretty simply explained. You are a big bad dungeon keeper. You are working for an agency which defends dungeons from pesky adventurers. So your job is to defend those dungeons. You can select from 3 different keepers, which you have to unlock first. And there's sort of a campaign mode introduced for every one of them. So there are different levels which have different themes and different creatures for hire. You start out with goblins and undead. There are demons and other really cool units to play with. The game features a lot of customization and modding as well. So if you want to make your game harder or easier, feel free to. You can always go for different approaches here. Speaking of difficulty, it'll all reflect in the experience gained of your keeper, which will unlock new talents for the guy, which is kind of a roguelite system where you keep the boss and you reset the game from scratch. So when we start out here, we see the background of the game. I don't want to talk about the manager aspect right now. I want to talk about the combat aspect first, because in my opinion it makes like 75% of the game, and therefore it's worth explaining first. So we see here a typical dungeon attack from adventurers. Down here you see the adventurers with all their skills, resistances, and HP, and all you want to know about these guys. It's pretty important that you check out how the enemies work. This guy, for example, attacks your front slot and can enrage his buddies. This guy attacks everybody with fire damage and shuffles your formation. And this girl attacks your back row with physical damage. It's imperative for this game that you weigh out who's standing where to mitigate the most damage on your team and inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy side. So, for example, we see that these guys are resistant against certain things and vulnerable against certain things. At the beginning of the game, you don't have really many options, so we can't just place down our creatures as we want to. But the further you go down the road, the more monsters you have to select from, and the more complicated your gameplay can be when you want to make sure that, for example, your front slot is good against physical damage and your back slot as well, to make the life as hard as possible for these guys. In this example though, nothing really matters because this guy was shuffled the first team anyways. So then we get to use traps. Traps are working pretty simple. They get triggered once the people walk through here. Let's place down that nasty saw. And this room, our dungeon keeper gets to cast a spell. There goes the next party of monsters. Let's just slap them down, and another trap will go here. So here's our good friend Mog, ready to defend the dungeon. And now the combat begins. After the preparation phase, the actual defense begins. So here's the initiative depicted, and well, our job is to take down those adventurers. You can select from the available skills, and I think it is pretty clear and self-explanatory. There are buffs and debuffs and damage over time. Lots of elements we are already used to from different games like these. I don't think I need to explain that too much, because Legend of Keeper does not necessarily reinvent the wheel here, but they do it really in a pretty comfortable style, and I personally do like the strategical aspect of balancing out weaknesses and strengths towards the enemies a lot, because this makes the game very complex if you want to, but very easy to pick up if you just want to slap down the monsters and go for it. You'll see on your own what you did wrong there if you don't spend too much thoughts. I like that because it makes it not overcomplicated by necessity, but you can spend a lot of thinking into it if you want to. So, to stop the adventurers, we can either kill them or shoo them away. Down there in the purple you see the morale bar. Unlike other games in this genre, morale has not only the effect of shooing the enemies away once it's empty, but the lower the morale of the adventurers grows, the more damage they take. This is, for me, one of my favorite mechanics about this game, because this makes morale damage always worthwhile. Unlike other games like Darkest Dungeon or Eratus, which feature both quite similar stress systems, well, Eratus has the insanity mechanic, but this here is way less a game of chance, because if we intimidate these guys, they will always have some consequences from that. The game is drawn in a wonderful pixelated style, which is not pixelated in a way that it is an eyesore, but also simple enough to make nostalgia feelings happen. And well, I do like how this game is drawn, because it really gives me those 90s vibes. And well, I personally played a ton of Dungeon Keeper back in the day, and this game really gives me similar vibes, therefore a real thumbs up. So, let's get into the next stage of the fight. We will sadly lose most of our monsters, but that's not really an issue. The monsters are meant to be overcome by the adventurers. There's one more trap, demoralizing these guys, and at the end of the dungeon there's your own avatar, which can fight on his own, and he's most likely the most impressive unit you can acquire. He's the dungeon boss after all. You lose the game if this guy gets killed. Your goal is most of the time not to let the monsters get to the boss. So, after every mission we get to receive a reward that's either going to be monsters, traps, or artifacts which bring permanent bonuses. We gain blood for every slain enemy, we gain tears for every scared enemy, and gold as a resource to spend on the way. Blood and tears are used by events all across the board differently. They have a lot of different uses, and therefore, well, it's pretty useful to earn both resources. So, the monsters you can acquire, you see here, they have different skills. I don't want to go too deep into that, because this would go too far. We're just going to pick up a random monster, which looks fun for us. There goes the skeleton bull. And now let's talk about the manager aspect of this game. You get to choose what happens every week, and we can choose between different options here, either buying stuff, training monsters, or a random event. The random event button is always available if you don't want to go for something specific. I think I don't need to talk about the merchant. I want to talk about the training system though, because it's a very unique and important part of the game. Monsters don't level up by using them, they only level up by visiting either the trainer or via some random events. When you train up monsters, they often gain new abilities and gain new stats. Here, resistances, HP, and all these things can go up or down. So this is where your manager aspect comes to life, and you can specialize your teams here, and it's pretty important that you strengthen the units that you want to use. I think this whole system goes pretty much without saying, but I wanted to mention that this game has a gold progression, not a experience point progression for your monsters. So here it goes down, some more events, and after a couple of weeks we get the next fight. The game also features a morale system. Whenever a monster gets beaten, it loses a certain amount of morale. Once the morale is gone, it has to heal up for a longer time. You can put the monsters into the garrison where they will chill and regain morale. You have to fight at least one fight with a monster in garrison to get a morale regain. Alright, so that's pretty much all about the game here. I really want to mention that this game has a wonderful humor. I really don't manage to play this game without laughing a couple of times every time. So it's really enjoyable on this aspect. And my personal favorites about this game are its balancing. The balancing is really good. It has a wonderful way of cranking up the difficulty subtly, but definitely. And yeah, it has a wonderful art style, a good game loop. My personal gripes about it are, to get into it, you have to grow into the style of thinking of countering the enemies and positioning your own units. It took me quite some time to get into it, and it felt quite exhausting when I started out with it, but the more often I played the game, the more I got used to it and the more fun it went. But I gotta say, this learning curve was kind of like the most negative part about the game. But beyond that, I cannot say anything bad about this game except that it has a certain learning curve involved, especially since this whole resistance gameplay is quite complicated until you get used to it. So the game itself is going like that. You defend the dungeon for a couple of weeks, then you get to fight a champion, and after that you get to choose the next dungeon, and then you get to continue your thing in new dungeons, and here we are at the next level where we get to use different monsters. You receive different rewards for that, and it's a unlockable system which I really like. But on the other side, I feel like it's gating you a little bit away from the content. I personally would prefer a system where I would be free to choose from all the keepers from scratch, but that's just me personally. Alright, that sums up the review so far. I hope it helped you to get a little bit of an overview about the game in itself. And feel free to leave me a comment down below if there are any questions open. Feel free to ask too. I'd be more than happy to answer. Also, leave a thumbs up on that video if you found that helpful. And of course, leave a subscription to my channel. Turn on those notifications if you like that kind of work. I am pumping out content every day, and I'd be more than happy to see you guys in the subscriber list. Have fun, stay awesome, stay safe, and see you soon. Bye-bye.